Hey, it's Mariana, and thank you for joining me on the Commitment to Growth podcast, a platform dedicated to helping you build resilience for lifelong momentum. We chat about healing, mindset development, and how to live in your authentic truth, because often it's not our problems that cause our dissatisfaction, but everything around them that we haven't yet addressed. Thank you for joining me today, and let's get into this week's conversation. Welcome back to the Commitment to Growth podcast, everybody. If you're new, welcome. And if you're not new, welcome back. My name is Mariana. I am the host, the founder of Commitment to Growth Resilience Coaching, and obviously the host of this very fun space. It is so lovely to have you here. And I am so happy to be here because Healing the Inner People Pleaser monthly theme for April 2024 is still in full swing. And with that, I have none other than the guest that I have for you today to help me facilitate this conversation, to bring you the tools to heal your people-pleasing patterns, break cycles of self-abandonment, of self-betrayal, and step into your authentic truth. It has been a minute since we did a guest interview here on the Commitment to Growth podcast, and I could not think of literally anyone to break the hiatus with who is better for this conversation specifically than Karenna Soto, who I am bringing you to the show today. Let me tell you a bit about Karenna in all her beauty and amazingness. First off, let me say that I met Karenna at the Los Angeles Evolutions Podcast Movement Conference just about a month ago now, which is crazy to think about. And we were in this women's meetup for women in the podcasting world that was offered at the event, and we were going around a table. We were all passing around our business cards, and Karenna spoke up and she told us about herself and what she did. And after we kind of had time to freely mingle and network, I literally just ran straight up to her and was like, we need to talk. You are amazing. I want to know everything about you. Let's collaborate. And now she's stuck with me, and she came onto the show to facilitate this beautiful conversation with me about this very important topic. So, to give you a glimpse into a bit about who Karenna is and what she does, Karenna is a dynamic force in communication, relationship building, and anxiety management. She is dedicated to empowering female leaders, and with her 4 years as a certified life coach and trauma-informed somatic practitioner, she guides women in speaking their truth, honoring their capacity, navigating tough conversations, and preventing burnout. In her decade-plus corporate journey, she transformed from a people pleaser into a respected, authentic leader. Woot! She is here to invite female leaders into their fullest, expressed, and confident selves. She is now serving as professional speaker and podcast host of the Fully Expressed podcast with Karenna. And by the way, right after we had this conversation on the Commit to Growth podcast, I went onto her show, the Fully Expressed podcast, and chatted about how to cultivate resilience to live a fully expressed life. So if you like this conversation, then you're sure as heck going to like that one. So I highly, highly encourage you to go check it out after you listen to this conversation, because they were both so valuable and so insightful and so, so inspiring. Let me tell you a bit about what we talked about here today as it relates to people pleasing. So this is such a vulnerable, beautiful conversation between two people who have really experienced the depth of people pleasing and the self-harm that it can really create, especially as two daughters of immigrants. So much of that runs so deep in our veins, and I just was so happy and blessed to have been able to resonate with so much of what she was saying, because it struck me so deeply. And I know that if you're here, you clicked on this conversation, it's because you are ready to break these cycles in your own life too, wherever stage of your healing journey you're at. So to give you a glimpse of what you can expect from us, we talk about the biggest fears that people pleasers have when entering difficult conversations, and how those fears drive them to self-sabotage and not advocate for themselves. We talk about the inner work that has to happen within our own selves in our alone time and within our relationships in those conversations to advocate for ourselves and break those cycles of people pleasing and self-abandonment in tandem with the people we love. We talk about how to practice detachment from the responses of other people, because of course, people pleasing is so tied to how we put our validation on how others respond to us, perceive us. So how to practice that detachment while showing up in vulnerability, to practice standing on our authentic truth and owning that in our relationships. And we chat about how to nurture that inner child of us that is the one that's really, really asking to be seen in those people pleasing tendencies. So it's like another healing the inner people masterclass with somebody who is so versed in this work, shows up just so beautifully and has such a beautiful way of expressing herself. So I cannot wait for you to listen to this. Buckle your seatbelts, grab a journal, make sure you're listening, make sure you're present, and let's go on to the conversation with the beautiful, the wonderful Karenna Soto. Karenna, good morning. Welcome to the Commitment to Growth podcast. Hi again, because we actually recorded this yesterday, folks, and we had issues with. Let's just start off on a really bluntly truth note. This is our second time sitting down for this conversation, but I wouldn't have it any other way because she's a fantastic human being. So, welcome. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. No worries at all. This just means actually I get to see you 3 times in the last 24 hours, because
We do.
right after this we'll be recording to get onto my podcast. So this is just going to
I
be a
know.
juicy conversation. I cannot wait for everyone to hear it, because yesterday's was just amazing, and we just get to do it all over again, which is beautiful in itself.
You know what's really interesting is so as people can tell from the title of this podcast, this is an episode on people pleasing. And after we logged off yesterday and it turned out that our recording just did not upload and did not work as it needed to, I was texting my friend and I was like, I feel so guilty. Like, what an inconvenience. And everything that we talked about yesterday was like coming to the surface. And he totally checked me and says, what was your episode about? Like, take the tools. It's okay. You apologize. And he said something really cool too. He said, very few times in life do we get do-overs. And so if it was good yesterday, it's going to be even better today. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah. I totally hear you, because I would have probably smiled like that too, maybe, in the past. And it's one of those things that what I found, like, the easier that we can just be with life and just navigate it, because it's just life and life happens, the more we can move on to the next and be like, all right, so what can I do from this? So I'm okay.
Exactly.
And I am excited, and we get to do it again. And I'm so excited for everyone that gets to listen to this,
Me too. Let's get right into it then. Tell us about yourself, what you do, and why you do what you do, so people know who you are.
Yes. Yeah. For those listening, my name is Karenna Soto. I am a broad amount of titles. Life and relationship coach, certified trauma-informed somatic practitioner, podcast host of the Fully Expressed podcast. And I was dancing between the words of, like, I don't necessarily call myself a recovering people pleaser, because I feel like I've definitely worked through a lot of that. But people pleasing has been a huge part of my journey. I mean, it's really the intention behind my podcast. It's who I am as a woman, because I feel like I didn't really bring myself to my relationships, to my life, like who I am as a human being, because of my people pleasing tendencies. So that's a little bit about me.
And how was that translated into maybe the message that you're giving the people you coach today, or like you public speak as well on burnout? How does people pleasing fit into that aspect of what you do now, or your story?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I did forget to mention that. So I'm no longer coaching women, but I have stepped into, this is a really great thing that I've realized. So something that I realized when I was coaching, it started from a place of people pleasing, which is so interesting, because I haven't shared this publicly yet. So this is the first time that the podcast gets to hear about this. But last year, I got the opportunity to start challenging, like, kind of every title or every role that I ever stepped into. Like 2020, end of 2022, and a lot of 2023 was like unraveling these labels that I put on myself, and kind of just reanalyzing, like, or readjusting or relooking at, like, who do I want to be? And I just kept coming back to, like, can I just be Karenna? Like, why do I have to be coach, speaker, podcaster, like all these titles, like girlfriend, sister, daughter? Like, when you feel those things, you do feel an energy that you take on when you put on those titles, right? There's a quality, there's a characteristic to those titles. And I went through this period in 2023 where I started to look back to like, why did I start coaching in the first place? If you get to know me and if you knew me back when I started, friends always came to me. I was always the person that helped them go deeply, support them emotionally. I was the one that said, I was always the one checking in on them. And so I really became that friend for a lot of people. It was like almost like I became that mother energy as well as that therapist energy. And I think life coaching for me was something that was always embedded in me. But if I peel back the layers and look back at it, it's because of the tendencies that I had to take care of everyone else, right? It was my people pleasing tendencies to like want to take care of everyone else, only knowing how to be there for everyone else. And what I've realized through that experience, and I loved coaching women and I still love coaching women, and I don't get to anymore, but there's something really beautiful of seeing someone start at A and end at Z, right? Like witnessing someone's growth is one of the most beautiful things about it. And I realized that a lot of my ego was playing a part of that. Like I loved being the person for that person, right? And then as I started to step into like who I really am, who am I authentically, what is my fullest expressed self, I realized I no longer wanted to show up in that capacity. And there was also something else that one of my talks is how to honor your capacity to prevent burnout. And I realized that I genuinely don't have the capacity to hold that much deep space on a one-on-one level. And so I did a little career pivot in speaking and just doing workshops. And it has been so fulfilling as a speaker to be able to speak to women. I think the women really resonate with my talks really, really well because they do feel like they have to do everything for everyone else. Like they're the ones that are always giving, giving, giving. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about my talk and she was telling me the same thing. And she's like, everyone needs to hear that. But when it comes to burnout, because of the fact that as a people pleaser myself, like I said yes to everything. I even offered when I did not have capacity to, or saying no to someone was scary, right? Like, and so by overstretching myself and over saying yes to everything and constantly offering to help, constantly offering to be there for someone else, and constantly hyper vigilating like towards like this is Cusco. Can you see him?
People on YouTube can see for sure. For those that can't, it's Karenna's dog.
See, so if you don't know,
who's
my
joining
dog
us.
loves to hang out with me, and he is joining us on video. So if you want to go jump into the video,
so cute.
Highly
recommend. Highly recommend.
He's such a sweetie. He's never done this before. That's so funny.
He gets to heal right along with us. So
yeah, he's like, Mom, I'm with you. Spending all this energy, like being hyper vigilant on everyone else around, other than myself, overexhausted, was exhausting. What led me to burnout, constantly worried about that person and what they needed, or managing their experience and their emotions and feeling responsible for them, and never bringing myself to the table, and then finding myself in this place of like disconnect, loneliness, like it's one of those things with people pleasing, that I know, Mariana, it's like, it's a double-edged sword sometimes. It's like you give so much from a place of love for love, but in return, sometimes because we don't know how to receive love in return, we end up feeling very depleted emotionally, spiritually, and mentally.
100%. You said something that really struck me there, this idea that your coaching career was in some way tied to those tendencies. I can look at some of those tendencies within myself and how I would say I've become more aware of them as I've kind of grown in this career, because I think I experienced that a lot at the beginning. When you're starting out, you want to serve everybody. And so you want to wear all the hats. Like you want to say, I can do inner child workshops, but I can also do burnout workshops, but I can also do divine masculine workshops, right? And it's not that you can't, it's not that you shouldn't, but it's, where is that coming from? Is it that you really can wear all those hats, or is it that you are trying really hard to be something for a vast amount of people when you can't hold that capacity, maybe quite yet, right? So it's important, I think, especially in this profession where really, and I always say this, any coach that is telling you what to do isn't coaching. They're giving you a formula and expecting that it's going to work out for you, when really the whole premise of coaching is I'm only here as far as your willingness to become your own guide, your own healer extends, right? So kind of talking on that burnout and that allowance of receiving love, because I know that that's a huge part. How does that perhaps incapacity to receive love lead to that burnout?
Hmm. I think the biggest things, I think, for people pleasers that might be able to understand this, like, it's so easy to offer help, but it's so hard to ask for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, like, just like I remember like being in my body and just like feeling in moments of turbulence or chaos or anything like that, like I felt like I couldn't ask anyone for help, that I was on my own to
Mm-hmm.
doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea of asking my partner or my mom or my sister to help me in
Mm-hmm.
any shape or form felt so stretchy, you know? And so
Mm-hmm.
it just feels like almost like you're like it's like almost not an option. You're like, wait, no, I can't ask people for help. I'm the person that helps everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something else that I had to deal with, was like, if I ask for help, am I looking as weak? Am I dropping the ball? Are
Mm-hmm.
they gonna be able to serve me in this way? Like there's this whole internal dialogue that comes from just like not being able to ask for help because we're so comfortable asking everyone else how we can help them or how can we be there for them, or we just do and then we don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
ask for that in return.
100%. I can resonate with that so much. And I think it's as counterintuitive as that might sound. I think we think people pleasing is very much standing in your power and in your truth. And there totally is a component of that. But I would say that the key to that healing work is actually mastering the art of surrender, right? Because we were talking about that double edged sword a moment ago. Do you want to go maybe into how it's a double edged sword as far as you're seeking love, but also the other side of it that isn't talked about as much?
Yeah. So so I started my healing journey about probably 50, anywhere between like 10 plus years now, not 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
but between 10 and 15 years ago. And I remember sitting
Mm-hmm.
on the couch with my best friend, and we had come across the Enneagram. So for those that don't know, the Enneagram is a personality test. There's 9 different types. And the the intention behind the Enneagram is to share with you who you are based off of like what happened to you in your childhood. And when you look at all the
Mm-hmm.
different types, you can definitely say like, oh, there's a part of me that's a little bit of that. Oh, there's a part of me that's a little bit of that. But the test
Mm-hmm.
really helps you highlight which one you lean into the most. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, I tested as an Enneagram 2. And so for anyone that doesn't know what that is, like it's the helper, it's the lover, it's the giver. So it has a lot of people pleasing
Mm-hmm.
tendencies. And I was just, obviously, I read this Enneagram test and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so me. It showed me
Mm-hmm.
the beautiful things of being the helper, the lover, the giver, but it also highlighted a lot of the reasons why I do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this one like podcast episode that I was listening to, and on the podcast episode, the guests were talking and they're like talking and they said, actually, twos are very selfish. And I took that to heart. I was like, wait, you're
Mm.
saying that I'm
Yeah.
selfish? What do you mean I'm selfish?
Yeah.
I put everyone
Mm-hmm.
before myself. The last thing I think about is myself. And
Mm.
as they broke it down and as I started to understand, what I realized that I leaned into people pleasing as a way to avoid what was going on within me internally, or as a way to
Mm-hmm.
avoid facing the fact that I didn't know who I was. I only knew who I was through helping other people. Like a really great
Mm-hmm.
example. that used to happen to me all the time is that when I would go to a party or go over to a friend's house and someone was hosting, like the first thing I went to do was like, I'm going to go to the kitchen and help someone else and see how I can offer to help. And that was my way of like safety, right? It was safe for me to help and do things instead of just mingling and connecting with the other people that were at the house. And what I realized, I started asking myself the questions of like, who am I when I'm not helping everyone else? Who am I when I don't ask someone how they're doing? Who am I when I'm not just calling my friends to check in to make sure that they're
Oh my
okay?
gosh.
And
Yeah.
who am I when I'm like just me? Like there's no part of me that's reaching for the other person or trying to be there for other people or focusing on everyone else. And asking those questions were really hard because I truly didn't know who I was without that. My identity was so wrapped into how and who and I was being there for everyone else and constantly managing my own experience to better someone else. So like in that, like I never brought myself to the room. I mean, it highlighted everything for me. It highlighted how insecure I was, how my lack of confidence I was. It highlighted how I didn't know how to communicate my feelings or share or do all these things. And so I think that was one of the most powerful moments. And I think it answers to like this
Wow.
double-edged sword. And what I had to do and realize was like, once I started asking myself those questions and identified that, I had to integrate it back in. So there's something about our healing journeys that I talk about all the time. It's like we pendulum swing. So a great example is like you might be extremely people pleasing, but in order to break people pleasing tendencies, you got to start putting yourself first and asking yourself what that is. And so it can feel selfish, but you got to learn that muscle. And so I had to step into that. And then I had to integrate it. So like I'm someone that now prioritizes herself, says what she needs and wants, and I can be super loving and understanding and care about other people too. And I think that was one thing I had to learn how to do because I thought that like it was bad of me to start being me and asking for what I wanted and what I needed, or I thought I was going to push people away because of that. And it was like, no, we just need to learn this muscle, if you will, or this skill set that I haven't, or bring it into my identity because I didn't even have this a part of my identity for, at that point, at least 25 years.
Hey there, real quick, just wanted to pop in to let you know that in case you haven't heard, and in case you didn't listen to the previous episode of the podcast called It's Not That You're a People Pleaser, It's That You Fear Rejection, I finally released my long-awaited Healing the Inner People Pleaser workbook. This is an 11 journal prompt deep dive into the 3 phases that I like to use in my coaching practice, in my own healing journey, to really get to the root of my people-pleasing cycles, understand the seeds of thoughts and beliefs that are driving those behaviors, nurture that connection with my inner child, let them know that I am serving them now, that I am protecting them, and really feed those insights into my relationships to cultivate growth and healing with the people that I love. Those 3 phases are the awareness, the amplification, and the alignment phases. So if you're ready to take an even deeper step into this healing work, this journey of inner work into stepping into your authentic truth and guiding from that in your relationships, this workbook is for you. Like I said, it's 11 journal prompts. You also get a video with your download of the workbook of yours truly, guiding you through how to get the most out of this practice, a little bit more into what those 3 phases represent, and really how to go about this work in a way that is effective and transcendental so that this that you do is sustainable and empowering for your relationships and for the rest of your life. So if you want to get your hands on this really, really powerful resource, go to www.commitmentogrowth.com/products-4-u. It's a long one, so head to the show notes if you want to just give it a click and go check it out. There is an offer on this workbook. It is only $777 for a limited time. That's 11 prompts, a video from me, and an email where you get everything for lifetime access. So head to the website, click the show notes to get access to your own personalized digital copy. And I cannot wait for you to give it a try and to further this work into the rest of your life. And now on to the rest of the episode. Oh no, the way my heart is dancing to everything you just said there. There's so many points I want to give so much grace to. The first one being that I really appreciate that you started off and said this is something that has taken me 10, 15 years, because I think it's really easy to tell ourselves that I should be healed by now. Like, I'm aware of it, so why am I not over it? But the way that, and so much of the premise of my show and my platform is understanding the neuroscience of our transformation, right? We won't get into it in detail here, but when you're breaking those people pleasing tendencies, you're rewiring yourself at a neurobiological level. So it's something that takes the time before it feels familiar, before it feels safe to do it, right? And something else that you touched on there is this idea of, well, I'm not someone who asks for help. Like, we tie our behaviors and mistake them for our identity, when our identity is how we view ourselves, but our capacity to receive love is not always dictating of who we are, because it's a skill, it's something that we have to develop and open ourselves up to, right? So maybe drawing on that, how do you think those fears, or what fears have you seen are very common in kind of making people avoid difficult conversations or speaking their truth? Like, what are the kind of common fears that people pleasers can resonate with?
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
I think this is the common fear for almost everyone, but people
Mhm.
pleasers are the same. But because we all have very common fears, but I think
Mhm.
the biggest one is like we want to control how someone perceives us, right? So like the way
Mhm.
we're really scared of how people can perceive us or judgments. The fear of no longer belonging, that's a huge one. So like not being able to
Mhm.
belong in your current community or your friends because you're starting to step into a different version of you. So there's that fear.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
which also leads to the fear of losing people,
Mhm.
the fear of no one liking you. It's
Mhm.
really the fear of, will this person not like me? Will they leave me if I say this? Will I no longer be accepted or wanted by my community? And the fear of being judged or looked differently than where we are today. And
Mhm.
also maybe there's also the fear of lack of understanding. So like being scared that someone may not understand why you're doing the things you're doing, which is really difficult when you're in the middle of your healing journey because
Yeah.
it's getting to when you're in the middle of your healing journey, it's really so much getting to a place where even if someone doesn't understand, you just do, right? Even
Mhm.
if someone doesn't get it, right? That you hear it, you tell them or whatever, like there has to be a sense of an attachment to how someone responds because their response doesn't define us. It's
Mhm.
in our practice, in our doing, in our identity that defines us, but not what someone says or not what someone does to our actions or to our being that defines us. And so
Yeah.
those are the ones that I would talk to. Just does that any of that resonate or does that make sense?
No, 100%. And I know we went into like a really beautiful dialogue on attachment yesterday, so I definitely want to bring it back. Now, again, we become aware of those fears, right? Okay, well, I'm responding in this manner because I'm really afraid that this person's going to think I'm unkind if I don't do this favor for them, or they're going to think that I'm a bad friend if I don't go to the party when I'm actually really exhausted today, right? Unattachment is not the same as indifference. Like, I want to make that really clear to the listener. It's not that you don't care what the person thinks or what the person says. It's more that you're not tying your worth to their response. But what does that inner work look like outside of those conversations where we can get to a place that there is that unattachment in your experience?
Oof. I mean, so
It's
I
a big question.
Good question. And I
Mhm.
say that with, I guess, not to scare anyone of like how big the work can do. I think first you gotta
Mhm.
like see the vision. Like, why do you want to make these changes? Why is it worth bringing yourself to
Mhm.
the table? As I started my work, as I started doing this for myself, I realized that it was, I realized that I was not bringing myself to the table. And as I started working with people, like, let's talk
Mhm.
about like parts work a little bit. Like, when you
Mhm.
connect to your inner child and you realize that she's screaming to be seen, loved, and heard, and you take a second to be like, oh my gosh, like I allow everyone to be seen, loved, and heard. Like I'm always thinking about the other
Mhm.
person. I was like, oh, it makes me so sad that I'm not doing that for me, like the smaller me. I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, makes me so sad. Like I no longer want to keep her in the closet. I no longer want to like shove her to the
Yeah.
side and say that her needs and her wants and her desires and this deep love is put to the side. And then like, get to this place of like, oh, like why am I leaving this person behind? Like I deserve that much love. I deserve to be seen and heard that much, like what does that really look like? And I think getting
Mhm.
to a place of wanting to do that for yourself, like really saying, like, I stand for me. There almost has to be this sense of like justice for yourself as a part of the healing
Mm.
journey because you got to want it, right? And I'm not saying that justice
Mhm.
is going to be there the entire time, but there has to be this sense of justice for your own parts within you. It's kind of like what I feel like this sense of like, I want to give this for myself. And then
Mhm.
from there, I think like the inner work really looks like practicing it. So, like, and getting compassionately curious. The first thing is get really compassionately curious as to like, okay, so I have this tendency to act in this certain way. What is the intention behind my tendency, right? Where is that coming from? What am
Mhm.
I trying to receive in this moment? And get really compassionately curious about your process. Like the more you can get compassionately curious about your process and how you are acting and why you're acting, not from a place of like shaming yourself as to like, God, Karenna, which that is going to come up. Of course, like you're going to feel guilty, you're going to feel shameful, you're going to feel like you're doing something wrong. And I would even get more curious as to
Mhm.
like, why do I feel like I'm doing something wrong in this moment? Like, why do I feel like this is
Mm.
wrong? And then as you start to peel back the layers, I would even ask yourself a couple more questions as to like, okay, is this my voice or is this someone else's voice? Where did I learn
Mhm.
these words?
Yeah.
Where did I learn this voice? And I love that practice in like my somatic sessions because you can start to hear like, oh, that's my mother's voice. Or, oh, that's my father's
Mm.
voice. Oh, that's
Mhm.
actually the kid that told me in middle school that I wasn't being nice or whatever when I did something I wanted, whatever that is, right? So you start to like
Mhm.
unpack this for yourself and start to connect to yourself.
Mhm.
And then to take it a little bit further, when you do inner child healing work, you can really get to a place of starting to see like the smaller you, like the smaller version of you that
Yeah.
experienced things in your life that either scared you, intimidated you, made you feel like you weren't good enough. And so being able to go
Mhm.
back to that little person and be like, hey, I love you. You're okay. And giving her
Mhm.
exactly what she needs, what she wants. Like, I think that was the biggest. This is like, I think that's what moved mountains for me was being able to learn what the different parts within me
Mhm.
actually needed and what they wanted. And I learned how to give those parts of me that, but I did that for myself. I wasn't asking
Mhm.
partner
Yeah.
to do that for me. I wasn't asking my mom to do that for me. I wasn't asking my best friend to do that for me. It was like me learning how to do that for myself, which when you get to that place, like this is all a relationship with yourself, it really supports you in surrendering into the unattachment because you'll hear someone and still care for them, but you're not expecting them to fix you or to heal you or to give you what you need or you want, right?
Mhm.
There's no sense of expectations or
Yeah.
assumptions. It's very much like, whether you show up for me in the way that I needed in that moment or I didn't, like I still got me. I still love me. You're not
Mhm.
hijacking my self worth because I've learned how to love me in these
Yeah.
moments. And that's the biggest thing. Now, when you are in relationship with
Mhm.
someone, I invite someone the next phase to this, which is like you got to do this for with yourself first, and then the next phase of this, like being in
Yes.
relationship with someone, is actually
Mhm.
communicating to someone else because you have practice of knowing what you need and what you want in certain moments. You can communicate that to your person and say, or to a best friend or anyone, and say, hey, what I really need right now is just reassurance. Can you reassure me that everything's going to be okay? Or like, hey, what I would love to hear right now, I would
Mhm.
love your feedback on this. Like, please give me some feedback. Or, hey, I would really love
Mhm.
a hug right now. Because the other person doesn't know what you need in those moments, but you're showing them and guiding them how you want to be loved. But it first starts with us learning how to love ourselves.
100%. Once again, I'm like getting goosebumps from that because it's so relatable at the point in which we talk about that inner child work, right? There's so much healing and release in recognizing that there was at one point a younger version of you that only knew how to approach or mitigate situations by creating those associations of, if I abandon myself right now, they're going to love me. If I don't speak up for myself, it'll lead to acceptance, right? But so much of the upwards work from breaking those cycles is realizing that you don't need those mechanisms anymore. And really, and not to minimize them in any way, right? But they were at once supposed survival mechanisms, right? But you don't need to be in that survival state anymore. And there's something really beautiful about recognizing that, yeah, like I got me. I can heal her. I can heal them. I can give that version of me the love that they were seeking now in my own self acceptance, in my own choice to amplify what I really desire, right? One one piece to the kind of bringing that work into relationships and interactions I think is really valuable is speaking about the fears that you're experiencing, right? Because sometimes it's really hard to, even if you've done your inner work by yourself, it's like the analogy of you have to practice what you're going to put into the game, right? Like how you practice is how you play. So you can do this kind of inner work where you're like, I recognize that I fear standing up for myself. I recognize that I fear speaking up about what food I want when I'm out with friends or something, when everybody's like, oh, what should we eat today? Right. But there's something really beautiful about stepping into those interactions and saying, hey, this is how I really want to show up right now, but I'm really afraid that you're going to perceive me as unhelpful, selfish, whatever. If I state that truth, what do you think about that? So, what is kind of your take on having that vulnerability in those interactions, and how does that help heal the people pleasing in some regard?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like vulnerability is everything, but
Mhm.
and I think practicing it with your closest friends or the closest people in your life, or the people that you feel the safest, is
Mhm.
number one. So, like, if we were to take that, I think even a step further a little bit is like, especially if you're stepping into breaking these people pleasing tendencies and like wanting to show up differently, um,
Mhm.
give the people that are the safest with or that you want to let in on your human experience and say, give them context and just say, hey,
Mhm.
I recognize this about myself and I want to shift that. I want to transition that. I want to transform
Mhm.
that into something more. So like I want to start breaking these people pleasing tendencies and like this is how I'm going to show up and this is what I'm going to start practicing and working on, but I just want to let you know. So you give them
Mhm.
context before you even get to a situation where you want to show up in a certain way, right? So you just break the ice a little bit, let them into your experience, let them into your story, because I think as much as understanding can be a way of safety, I think when you're starting off this journey, it's so important to create that safety. So your experience is being held and received in a supportive way to help you
Mhm.
basically rewire, set new neural pathways, in
Mhm.
your system, in your psyche, so that you can do it when things are hard. So first, context. Second, 100% give people, just say, hey,
Mhm.
and I find myself wanting to say no right now, and I'm struggling to say no because as I look at my calendar up for the next week, it's really busy, but I feel bad that I won't be able to do this for you. But like, I really don't think that I can, but I want to let you know into my experience, like, this is how I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling. And then the other person is going to be like, hey, if you really don't have time this week, let's set it into next week and be like, oh, okay. But at least they have context,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you already trying to take like break these people pleasing tendencies. So like you're like, I know the right thing for me
Mm-hmm.
to do right now is something different, but I always say yes, and I know like I don't really have the capacity to, so I gotta say no. So that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like the
Yeah.
next step to it, right? Is like letting them into your experience. Um, and something that I always tell everyone: practice before you go play game. So before you go play
Mm-hmm.
basketball. So like, what does that mean? So, I'm asking you guys right now as you're listening to this to go with go do it with a close friend, go do it with a close family member, maybe do it with your partner, someone that you feel really safe with. Practice in
Mm-hmm.
those relationships because when things get hard is when you're going to do this with someone that you don't know or someone that you are more intimidated by or someone that you hold at a certain different way or relationship to them is a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to get harder, but you got to show it to practice the way that you want to play ball. And so when you are playing ball and you are
Mm-hmm.
having those really hard conversations and you are trying to set boundaries and you are trying to speak your truth and you are trying to say, hey, I need to put myself first in this situation, at least you have
Mm-hmm.
practice in places that you feel with people that you feel safe with.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Then you can kind of create a definition for what that safety has to look like in terms of how somebody mirrors your response back to you, right? You said something that struck me so much. I just kind of had this aha moment of when we have these people pleasing tendencies overriding our capacity to speak our authentic truth, it's because we derive a sense of safety from our response, like how our response, we think, is controlling the outcome. Because we kind of spoke about that double-edged sword earlier, in that yes, it is rooted in this desire to secure love and acceptance, but the other side to that is that it's it's controlling. That's why surrender is so important to develop as a skill, because when you realize that it's not your job to control how another person responds to you, you liberate yourself of living from this perception of a perception. Like, I'm going to drop everything to go see this person because that means that I think they'll see me as really nice, so therefore I must be nice. You attach what you think they think about you onto who you are, right? But that's where I think so much of the burnout happens, is that you're never really living according to how you want to perceive yourself. You're living according to what you think others perceive you as. So, could we maybe touch on that safety piece a little bit and how that's rooted in maybe how those responses manifest, or like our way of reacting versus responding in those situations?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we're always looking for safety. I think it's one of the most primal things within our system, right? We're constantly
Mm-hmm.
scanning the room, scanning relationships, and being like, how can I keep myself safe, right? So, our
Mm-hmm.
ego, our subconscious mind is constantly filtering through past experience and saying, like, hey, I had this last past experience. So, that didn't feel safe, but like now this feels safe, like you have to constantly, you're always trying to create safety. That's the biggest thing. Like we're trying to create safety.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as people pleasers, we're going to find the safety in how we've done things, even though it's causing us more pain because it's a familiar pain.
Mm.
It's a familiar way of being.
Oh.
And we have safety in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means that, like, hey, even though this sucks, like this relationship doesn't feel good, at least I feel safer in showing up in this way because I've done this multiple times over the years. Like, this is something I really know. This is a lot safer versus
Mm-hmm.
being able to step in and do something uncomfortable and say no and speak your truth
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey, like, I don't have capacity for this or not, because that's not your norm. Your ego, your internal being is going to be like, that's scary. I've never done that before. So we're just going to shy away from
Mm-hmm.
that. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that because that's scarier. Even if that can be scary for a little bit, and at the end of the day it's going to be less painful than the experience you're having now. But because we are constantly comfortable
Mm,
in people pleasing, and we find safety in
yeah.
people pleasing, doing the opposite to our system is going to be so hard for us and so difficult for us. And so
Dysregulating, awful. Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
dysregulating. It's
Absolutely.
triggering. Everything comes up for us. The
Yeah.
constant thoughts of like, if I do this, I'm going to lose this person. I'm no longer going to belong. I am going to get someone. Someone might get mad at me. Someone might think I'm too much. I mean, there's just all these different dialogues that could be going on in our minds as we're trying to shift from our current way of being
Mhm.
that is safe to a better way of being that is scarier, but we
Mhm.
have to find and create our own safety in that. And so how do you transition from like A to B? Well, in B, we recognize it's going to be very dysregulating. It's going to be very difficult. We're going to spiral.
Mhm.
We're going to second guess
Yeah.
everything. We're even going to have subconscious habits that just show up. And then you're going to think to yourself, like, wait, I just did that out of habit, not because I really thought and made a
Mhm.
choice about it. So when you're up
Mhm.
against these inner conversations, you got to step into now creating a new safety within yourself. And so it's reminding
Mm.
yourself that you're safe, reminding yourself that you're still loved, reminding yourself that you're still worthy, reminding yourself that you're going to be okay, even if someone may not understand why you're doing the things you're doing, even if someone
Mhm.
does not agree with where you're at, even if like the person decides that, you guys no longer meet each other in relationships. That's okay. Because if you hold back to the vision that we talked about earlier, at least your needs are
Mhm.
getting met. It's internal, like you,
Mm.
and therefore going through the hard for a little bit is going to attract and create all these other things that meet you in a different way, because the version of you now is being met in the way that you're showing up, but you're asking to be loved and to be heard and seen differently. That means we have to show up
Mm.
differently.
Oh my gosh, another aha moment. You're being met how you're showing up, but the people that will get it are the people that see what's beneath that, right? Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful. That just gave me so many butterflies, like the one on my shirt right now. You can't see if you're just listening, but now in that, because I think that is so pivotal, is equating safety with staying rooted in myself, right? I can hear or see a lot of people thinking in their heads like, great, but what if I don't think I deserve to show up a certain way? Because I think it's kind of like the example of when you just state affirmations but don't embody them or don't feel them, right? Like you can recite affirmations to yourself a million times, but you'll never actually believe what you're saying lest you really integrate them and really take time to sit with them. So if somebody's listening right now and they're like, I do want to show up differently and I hear you and I want to take all this advice, but I just don't believe that I'm worthy of showing up a different way. What is that maybe last step to that self reclamation in your experience?
Whew, I feel like we won't feel worthy of something unless we try it. I think,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get to this place of assuming that we're not worthy of something versus like putting ourselves out there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Again, compassionately curious with yourself is like, why is my sense of self worth? Why do I feel like I don't deserve that? Or
Mm-hmm.
there's no way of being. I think I want us to also highlight that we're not just affected by our past experiences, but we're affected by the cultures that we were raised in. We're affected
Mm-hmm.
by the way that our mothers raised us, our fathers raised
Mm-hmm.
us. We're affected and influenced by the experience we've had. And, even if you look at cultural dynamics, Hispanic, I come from a Hispanic Latina culture, our
You and me both,
it's in our
sister.
nature.
You and me
We are,
both.
we are
Yeah.
born to give and put people before ourselves,
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
say that with like,
Mm-hmm.
you're not only in this state trying to heal generational your trauma or your way of being, you're going back generations of trauma. And so you have to give yourself credit, because the way that you grew up or the worthiness that you feel could be coming because your mom didn't feel worthy, or your grandmother didn't feel worthy, or your great grandmother didn't feel worthy. So it's
Yeah.
really peeling that back. I think that gives everyone some sense of understanding and validation, you know? But at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, I got to a place where I was like, do I want my daughter to feel the same way that I felt? Do I
Oh,
want my
wow.
son to feel the same way
Wow.
that I felt? If I want do I want the people around me, because I'm also influencing people. Like, if I can be an example of worthiness and confidence and expression and security, then I'm going to get to invite and be able to invite others into the same path. And so I think it really has to come for your why. Like, why do you want this? It's bigger than anything. And then just reminding yourself that you are worthy. Like, I could say, like, whoever's listening to this, I could say, like, you are worthy. You are deserving of so much love. You are so perfect the way that you are. Everything that you bring to the table is everything. But my words only mean something if you believe them. So, in my perspective, if you're listening to this podcast episode or watching it on YouTube, if any of this gave you like a little, like your ears lifted and you're like, ooh, I want that. Ooh, that's possible. It wouldn't show up for you as something that you truly are worthy of if you did not already think that you wanted it. So, like, how do I say this? Like, anything that you desire in someone is already within you. Anything that you hear and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I want to be able to show up that way. I want to receive that kind of love. I want to receive and be heard and seen. That means that it's available to you. So those are like my two things that I always come back to, is like, your why has to be strong enough. If you're willing to feel worthy, you got to go through the messiness of why you don't feel worthy, and like learn to love that part of you, feel worthy to feel worthy. Right? It's not in the
100%.
affirmation of like, I'm worthy. Like, to me, has been finding that worthiness, messiness, and learning how to love myself, even in times that I don't feel worthy.
Isn't that really like the golden needle, right? Or what's the word?
Yeah.
How you move the needle? Like in
Yeah.
the giving yourself evidence that you are worthy. Because I think that's one thing, right? Like, you can affirm it to yourself a million times, but your brain won't accept it as truth, lest you show up in a conversation and you say, hey, I'm really afraid right now of giving you this response because I'm afraid of how you'll perceive me, but this is my truth. And then somebody recognizes your bravery and your vulnerability, and you're like, it is okay. I am worthy. And that's not to say that we should derive our worth from the responses of others, because sometimes that response will be what we don't want it to look like, right? But it's still encouraging yourself for having spoken from that authentic truth, and that's really where that self-reclamation comes from. So that was such a beautiful note to end that on. I think I really, really want people to take that to heart and say, if you can see it, you can achieve it, right? Because if people clicked on this episode, it's probably because a part of you already knows that you are worthy of more and are capable of more, but it's just exactly like you said, like going through the messiness to get there. And the messiness is beautiful too. There's a lot of growth to be done there. So, Karenna, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. I just can't let you go without your rapid fire round of questions, which is the tradition here on the Commitment to Growth podcast. So, for those who are just tuning in for the first time, each guest on the podcast gets 3 questions. The first 2 are uniform for everybody, but the third one is unique to the guest. So, are you ready?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay, the first question is, what song is currently stuck in your head?
Just Me by Stella Dawn.
What is that song about?
It's just, I think it's more of like the song. I like, here, I don't want to play it, but it's about just you and like love and relationships. So I'm such a feeler that like sometimes it's more of
Yeah.
the way that it makes me feel than the words sometimes, and I'm just like singing it and I'm in my head about it. That's what it's really about. So
No, 100%. If you give me a good guitar solo, like, you roped me in. I hear you. I love that.
right.
I love that. And also perfectly fitting for this conversation. So,
Yeah.
Beautiful. The second question is, what is your favorite quote?
Hmm. The quote that I have so my boyfriend and I have a quote in our bedroom, and it says, I wish we found each other a long time ago because we've always deserved this kind of love. Something along those lines. And so I love it
Mm,
because
mhm,
it just reminds me that I was always deserving of love, like I was always deserving of the
mhm,
kind of love that I have now with him. And it's so
mhm,
beautiful because I want others to also remember that like you are so
mhm.
deserving of the love that you want now. Like before you are
Yes.
healed, before you've done all
Yeah.
this work, I think sometimes, especially I don't want to go off on a tangent, but in this
Mhm,
healing world and personal development world, you can get to a place of like, I'm not healed enough. I haven't worked enough to receive the kind of love that I'm supposed to call in. And it's like, no, like you are worthy of that love now, not after all
mhm,
this work that you are worthy of that love now and you are deserving of that love now. So that's my favorite quote.
mhm. 100%. No, again, so beautifully and perfectly fitting for this conversation because I think that is a narrative that gets so lost in the world of self improvement is like, after I do all this work, then I'll have everything on the palm of my hand. But it's like, no, you're already deserving of the love that you desire and that you want to create for yourself. It's just about stepping into that place where you can say, I deserve it despite where I am now. Because usually it's the expectation that you're putting on yourself is not what should be on your shoulders, you know? So I love that.
Right.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad that it's in a place where you can always see it too. Your third question is, if you could go back in time to younger people pleasing Karenna, what is one thing you wish she knew then that you know now about giving yourself love?
Your words, your voice matters. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I always look back at that version of me and I have this sense of like, why did no one shake me? Why did no one like say like, or no,
Mm-hmm.
why did no one see me? Why did no one remind me that what I thought or like encourage me to say how I was feeling, or someone didn't like, encourage me to express what I liked and what I didn't like and spent that time with myself. So if I can go back to younger me, like I would spend so much time with her and say, hey, what do you
Mm-hmm.
want? What do you like? How are you doing? How are you doing? And
Yeah.
really, really like, I don't even like stubbornly been like, no, we're going to sit here until you can tell me how you're really doing or like what you really like. We'll go through this
Mm,
process together. Um, because, looking back at her, I was like, you were always worth being at the table. You were always worth like being
mm-hmm.
thought of. You were always worth
Yeah.
um, someone caring about how you're doing, like all of that is, you were so deserving of that. Like I get emotional thinking about it
Mm-hmm.
because back at her,
Mm-hmm.
she just didn't bring herself to life. That's what it felt like. I felt like I didn't
Mm.
really bring myself to life. I only lived life for everyone else and I left myself behind. So that's what I would say to her.
Wow, no, that's beautiful. And it's so true. You don't do the world any favors by tuning yourself out or drowning out your voice, right? There's so much grace and power in showing the world that I'm on this messy journey, but I can still show up as I am and for what I want, right? So I love that. And I'm so glad the listeners got to hear that. And thank you again so much for not just your expertise, but your presence and like the way that you say things. I'm sure younger Karenna would look up to you now and say, oh my gosh, like amazing, incredible. I'm so proud because she totally should be. So where can people find you after this episode so they get more of your goodness?
The best way to find me is on Instagram. It's I am Karenna Soto. And then I also have the podcast, which is the Fully Expressed Podcast with Karenna. And then we do have a
Mhm,
community called, I have an online virtual community called the Fully Expressed Community, which is really meant for the women that want more. That's the best way to connect with me. And also, I'm no longer coaching, but if speaking or workshops or how do I say, just connecting in the DMs, it sounds good to you. Like I'm so here for that because I just love,
mhm,
I love connecting with people. No, I don't hold that one-on-one container. So I just tell everyone, don't be shy. Like
mhm.
I'm not going to try to tell you on anything. We're just going to vibe and be friends. So
Yes,
that's where I'm at.
yes. I love it. Everything will be linked in the show notes for people to access, just so everybody knows. But once again, Karenna, thank you so much. Your presence is so enjoyable and so beautiful, and I am just so excited of the needle that we get to move using this conversation in people's lives. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for what you're doing. Like, really, like, Mariana, you're such a gift. Like I mentioned yesterday, I'm going to say it again today, and I'm going to say it again later today. Like, the program that you have doing this is really, really well done. So thank you for letting me be a part of it today.
Thank you. The privilege is all mine. We'll see you later. Thank you so much again for tuning into this conversation, everybody. Once again, if you enjoyed Karenna and everything that she had to say, make sure that you stay connected with her. I have linked all of her social media handles, her own podcast in the show notes so that you can go and listen to more of what she has to say. But also, I especially recommend our conversation on how to live a resilient life to live a fully expressed life on her show as well. If you like this episode, send it to somebody who you know would benefit from it, who is on their own healing journey of people pleasing, and make sure that you subscribe to the show, leave a like, leave a comment. It just helps the message of this episode and this work reach the people that it needs to reach, who are on their own healing journey as well. If you enjoyed it and you want to make sure that you are up to date with future podcast episodes, again, not only subscribe to the channel, but follow me on Instagram and TikTok. It's at Commitment to Growth. And if you head to my website, www.commitmenttogrowth.com, you can get links there to wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, iHeartRadio. All the links are there for you to get access to your favorite podcast platforms. There's also resources from me on how to work with me one-on-one through resilience coaching and how to tailor the resilience coaching journey to the needs that you're needing right now to live a resilient life. So I am open right now for one-on-one coaching. If it's something that you're curious in exploring, just send me a message on the contact form on my website. And don't be a stranger. Stick around. We've got some really, really exciting monthly thematics coming out for you that I cannot wait to share. And wow, what a conversation. What a beautiful human being. Karenna, thank you again so much for coming on the show. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next conversation.